Hello again, and welcome to the latest faction review for Gates of Hell Ostfront. Today we're going to be reviewing Japan. In case you haven't watched any of the previous videos, feel free to go watch them after. I've covered Italy and Hungary at this point, and in case you're not aware, these are not factions available through the base game. It is through Valor mod. So if you are looking to play with any of these, I highly recommend downloading the mod. It's available on the Steam Workshop, and it gives you access. It really quite adds something to the game. Japan is one of them. So to start off, we have our infantry, light infantry, pretty basic unit. In general, you will find that Japanese infantry, go a little closer, usually actually quite good. Rifle actually fires a pretty good round. Generally, I think good quality infantry. This unit is a light infantry unit, so the squad commander or section leader is armed with a machine gun, the Type 100 submachine gun, and the rest of the riflemen are armed with the Type 38 Arisaka. So it fires a 6.5 by 55 millimeter round, reasonably powerful. The only thing I've noticed is a lot of them are rather lightly equipped in terms of anti-tank weapons, in terms of grenades, things like that. So definitely something to watch out for, but a good basic unit of infantry. Going on to the next one, anti-tank riflemen. Decent early in the game, like a lot of the early anti-tank teams in any of the factions. Good against armored cars, any of the things that you're going to encounter early, you'll want to replace it pretty quick. It doesn't have that much penetrating power, but useful early on. Medic, honestly, worth it. Take it. Regular squad, pretty much the same as the light infantry, but it does come with a light machine gun, in this case the Type 99. They've done actually a reasonable job of modeling it here. Keep in mind this is not a developer made mod. This is something that somebody from the community has made, so shout out to the creator. Good job modeling everything. You know, again, pretty much the same type of infantry, just with the addition of a machine gun that really does help you. I find the extra firepower does make a difference. Heavy regular squad, kind of interesting for the Japanese. They are equipped with light mortars, the famous knee mortar, because apparently U.S. servicemen encountering them thought that you were supposed to fire it from the knee or the leg. It did have quite a recoil, and it would break your legs. So it was a standard light mortar or grenade discharger, really. Quite an effective weapon. You could actually modify a standard Japanese infantry grenade to be fired from it. So interesting that they have them right in the squad. So there are two of them. What I have found, at least using the Commonwealth faction, is that a lot of the, not light mortars, but I don't know if it's how they're modeled, but they're not quite other mortar would be, or a machine gun. They're kind of modeled as an infantry weapon, so I find they're a little bit janky with how they operate. I haven't had great success with them. Let me know if you have. They can be useful, but I think that maybe something in the mod just didn't quite hit. Otherwise, pretty standard infantry squad, but those mortars could make a huge difference if you can get them to work. Special Naval Landing Force Shanghai Detachment. Just a historic note, the SNLF, or Special Naval Landing Force, commonly referred to as Marines. Not really Marines, they're more naval infantry. They are sailors, technically. Sort of interesting that they're showing this, somewhat earlier force here, armed with the Bergmann 1920, so the Irma submachine gun. They were equipped with that, and the Type 11 light machine gun. This is such an interesting machine gun. It's almost like somebody described a light machine gun to somebody who had never seen it. Mechanically, it's actually okay. It's just extremely prone to jams. Essentially what happens is, in this section here, you lift up that lid and you actually put in the standard rifle clips, so the 5-round clips you'd be putting into your standard rifle, and then it just fires them like that. You stack them on top of each other. The issue is they have to be greased, and it is an open feed essentially, so any dust or mud is guaranteed to get in there. However, great that they have modeled it. I think it provides a nice little extra touch, a little extra flavor for this unit. Otherwise, they are pretty much standard infantry. In my most recent playthrough of Japan, I kind of based it around this type of unit. They are more expensive, but they are worth it. They're really quite skilled. They're otherwise just a standard infantry unit, but they're quite good. Funny thing that I've just noticed, his bayonet is fixed and he has another one in his belt. Interesting, doesn't really make a difference. Kamikaze squad, I've never actually used this. I imagine they have a explosive pack. I'm really not sure how they work. However, they do have the Type 2 submachine gun, so much later, rarer weapon. He will shoot his thumb off, but I guess as a kamikaze unit, maybe he doesn't care that much. So an elite little maybe commando or special unit that could be fun to play as. I have not used them, but it looks, yeah, like he does have a sort of bomb vest on. Paratroopers, army paratroopers, the Japanese military at this point, really throughout all the Second World War and before, was sort of inter-service rivalry on crack. The Imperial Japanese Army and Navy did not get along at all. They had to have sort of separate air services, separate paratroop units. They would not cooperate in the slightest. So you'll see a lot of duplication in the Japanese forces at this point in history. Paratroopers being just an example, but it would actually go to the extent that they would refuse to support each other or cooperate. I don't want to get too much in the history just because, you know, it's a whole video in itself, but do look into it. So definitely very active early on. I know in a lot of the Dutch colonies, they were used to basically secure airfields as you would paratroopers. Reasonably successful, although they did suffer extremely high casualties, but a good elite unit. They are armed with 2 submachine guns, light machine gun, and the rest are riflemen. So otherwise a somewhat standard unit. SNLF, so Special Naval Landing Force, your regular guys. So a lot of these guys actually ended up fighting in the South Pacific, sort of garrisoning islands, things like that. A lot of times what would happen is you'd have an island that would be garrisoned either by the Imperial Army or Navy. A lot of these guys did end up fighting against the U.S. Marines, U.S. Army as they invaded, so a lot of them did get wiped out. However, they were, you know, generally quite high-quality troops. They are equipped with 3 submachine guns and a light machine gun, so that does give you a good amount of firepower. Once again, a decent elite unit. Imperial Japanese Army Tokumu Kaikan. Any Japanese viewers, I apologize for my pronunciation. Do correct me in the comments. I do the best I can. Sorry, can't speak Japanese or Hungarian or Italian. This is going to become a theme. Maybe good for some stealth type operations, depending on how you play. If you just want a good little elite unit, I haven't really used them, to be honest. I don't generally go for units like this. I prefer sort of larger sections. Imperial Guard, lead infantry. It's all riflemen and a light machine gun. So this is I guess the final Japanese unit you can reach. So probably pretty good. I've never used them, but interesting. SNLF Spec Ops, so elite unit. They do have a machine gun, a AT infantry, so this is a quite late war unit. The Type or anti-tank rocket was modeled after the American bazooka. I believe some of them might have been used on Okinawa late in the war, but it really was something that came in quite late in the Second World War. Again, armed with those Type 2 submachine guns. So really this is representing a lot of the more creative, interesting units that were formed as the Allies, really the Americans, closed in on the Japanese home islands. So it does give you a little more flexibility. There is a grenade discharger, a anti-tank rocket, and quite a few submachine guns, so at least 2 here. So decent unit. Mechanized infantry, you have the paratroopers in this case. They do have submachine guns, that anti-tank rocket again. You've got 3 submachine guns, the rocket-propelled grenade, and then the rest are riflemen. So elite unit, good anti-tank capability, which is lacking from a lot of the Japanese infantry, and essentially a tracked armored personnel carrier, the Hoki. Again, sorry about my pronunciation. That does give you a machine gun, though note it is not shielded, so that gunner is going to be quite vulnerable. Though if you do prefer using mechanized infantry, they can be quite a potent way to go. Auxiliary detachment, sort of the first infantry you could get. They are actually quite decent. I think they're maybe a little bit more skilled than the light infantry units you can get, so I have used them just kind of bulk out my force, spent those last few points. You can put them together to form squads. In this case, there is no machine gun, but they do have a submachine gun and 2 riflemen. Mortar, so again, those somewhat problematic light mortars. I don't know if that's just how I use them or if there's some sort of issue maybe with like line of sight. I haven't had very much luck with them. Machine gunner gives you a light machine gun and a assistant. So good to maybe combine with auxiliary detachments to form squads. Rifle grenade infantry, essentially can be good support weapon. I don't think they're really that worth it, to be honest. Combat engineer, anti-personnel mines, to be honest, fantastic just to really mine choke points. It can be quite an asset in defense, kind of useless in attack, but I always, like I said before, prefer the AT mines. Some of these guys have held up entire armored attacks. I've noticed if you just anticipate where the enemy is going to come from, mine a crossroads, mine a road they can't really go around, the AI will drive right into it, and it's quite a annoying threat to your opponent. So definitely these guys are worth it. And then once they've planted their mines, just dig them in as infantry. They can fight, and they're really good at repairing vehicles that you've captured as well. Flamethrower unit, I've never had that much luck with flamethrowers, to be honest. I think they're honestly a liability, and you're most likely to just torch your own guys. If you like it, it's there. Funny how it's modeled. No tank. Don't worry about it. Combat engineer, sappers. So these guys, good to dig your tanks in, dig your infantry in. Really, really worth it on the defensive. And they can actually deal with mines. Funny, they're called mine disposal experts. Who would know? So really great on defensive, and you can use them almost like a sort of backup or reserve squad. If you bring a few of them, they can clear mines for you, repair vehicles. Sometimes I actually use them to recrew my vehicles if I've lost crew. 240 millimeter Type 45. I really have no idea how this actually works. I never reached it. It looks insane. I don't really know, to be honest. Tank crew, good to bring just to recrew your tanks or capture enemy vehicles, especially early on. The Japanese tanks do have quite light armor, so you will probably lose crew. So maybe good to bring some. Sniper, I love the camo netting on him. The Type 99 rifle, the Arisaka, actually quite an effective sniper. It was long, and it had decent stopping power, but the length of the barrel actually meant that most of the propellant had burnt off by the time it reached the end of the barrel, is my understanding. So it gave very little muzzle flash. Aside from that, it was actually quite an accurate rifle. There's a lot of bad rap that comes with this rifle, and a lot of that comes from the rifles that were produced near the end of the Second World War that ended up sort of being sold off, ended up in the market in the US. A lot of these, the manufacturing standards really, really did go downhill, and this is sort of where the reputation comes from. But a lot of the earlier ones produced in the 30s and even into the Second World War, extremely high quality. They had actually some interesting little features like dust covers on the bolt. They had actually little flip out wings on the sight that you could use for firing at aircraft, which is somewhat optimistic, but still quite a neat little feature. So generally quite a high quality rifle, but does have a bad reputation, unfortunately. though I don't think a very well-deserved reputation. Officer, good for sighting, otherwise, not super useful. I don't usually take them, but they are good for that line of sight. Infantry supply crate, especially useful early on when you do have to rely on your infantry a lot more. Just keep in mind this is only usable for small arms resupply, so your rifles, submachine guns, things like that. You won't be able to re-equip artillery. Type 92 machine gun. Actually, the Japanese machine guns are quite good in this game. I do recommend them. Usually, I just use the squad's light machine gun or the machine gun on tanks, though, if you do want to bring machine gun, these are worth it, I think. Often, though, I just capture enemy machine guns. Type 92 Lewis machine gun. Interesting, the American Lewis gun was actually used by the Japanese, I believe through the First World War and into the Second World War as well. It was rechambered in the Arisaka ammunition, though, I guess the 7.7 by 58 millimeter. So interesting that they have included that actually, and this one's on a tripod, so it does give you limited anti-aircraft capability. To be honest, it's not going to do much against aircraft, but it does give you a machine gun that can fire all around. 13 millimeter Type 93, good light anti-aircraft, shred infantry. Worth it, maybe. 20 millimeter, good light autocannon. I would say this is probably effective against aircraft, definitely against infantry, light armored vehicles, things like that. 20 millimeter Type 2, again, it's a good light anti-aircraft weapon, effective against ground troops as well. So, yeah, worth it. So we have the Type 97 20mm anti-tank rifle. This is quite a potent weapon. As anti-tank rifles go, it's one of the better ones, though I don't usually recommend them, at least not after the first few rounds. They're good early on against soft skins, certainly, armored cars, some of the early light tanks. It does give you 22 millimeters of armor penetration at 100 meters, so not bad, though. Look to replace it with something heavier early on. Okay, now we're going on to the artillery. So the first one we have is the 37mm Type 11 gun. I'm not really sure what I'd call this, maybe an infantry gun. Getting into the Japanese artillery, a lot of it, really gets quite a bad reputation. And by the time of the Second World War, a lot of it was getting obsolete, especially when you compare it to the more modern Commonwealth and American weapons that were being used against it. However, it was built to do a specific task, and I think it actually managed that task reasonably well. Manufacturing quality was usually quite good, especially pre-war, so in the 30s. However, you have to think about what Japan was dealing with at the time. Again, I'm not advocating for the Imperial Japanese Army or the state, but essentially they were designed to operate in the Asian theater across extremely large territory, long supply lines. So, really you had to have things that you could transport, things that you could move across quite bad roads, and something you could keep supported, right? And sort of take apart, put on pack animals, even carry. So a lot of it ends up being quite light. And you see that actually throughout a lot of the period, even into the Chinese Civil War, into the 50s, where a lot of the weapons that they were really favoring were lighter than you would see in Europe, sort of mountain howitzers, things like that. And that's really what was suited to the type of conflict that they were in. So Japanese weapons in this game, I think really do represent that. And you're going to have pretty good weapons. They hit hard. They're generally quite accurate. Unfortunately, they have a low range, right? Which comes with that ease of transport, right? In a lot of those smaller weapons. So you will have to be quite aggressive with them. So this does give you, a modest anti-tank capability, 39 millimeters at 100 meters. So early in the game, that's going to be quite effective. And with a two-man crew, this is going to be quite mobile. 37 millimeter Type 94 anti-tank gun, 40 millimeters at 100 meters, so reasonably potent weapon, especially early in the game. Quite mobile as well, so really you can get this anywhere, and it's going to be an effective weapon. Though it won't do very well against a lot of the later vehicles. I usually fight against the Soviets when I played the Japanese, so by the time you sort of get past the BT tanks or the fast tanks, you're gonna have quite a lot of trouble using something like this. However, very effective early on, and you can definitely deal with armored cars. It'll be useful against infantry, but the Japanese do need good anti-tank weapons. The infantry kind of lack the ability to deal with a lot of it. 47 millimeter Type 1, much more potent weapon. Gives you 67 millimeters of penetration, so pretty good medium anti-tank gun. Worth bringing in the defense. 57 millimeter Type 2, even better, so it gives you 98 millimeters of penetration, which is, quite good actually into the mid game. 75 millimeter Type 88, kind of looks like the 88, but it does have anti-aircraft capability, so definitely a bonus. You're gonna want to tow this thing. It's quite heavy, but it does give you 88 millimeters of penetration, so it's a good multi-role gun. Okay, on to the 75 millimeter Type 90. Now you're getting into proper sort of field guns, I guess, is what this would be classified as. 92 millimeters of penetration, so actually quite effective against tanks. It's also going to give you a reasonable high explosive charge for dealing with infantry. Not great at indirect fire though, so I haven't really done too much with them. 75 millimeter Type 4, 133 millimeters of penetration, so really quite an effective anti-tank weapon, and it will give you anti-aircraft ability as well. You're going to want to tow it. Interesting, I wonder why it only has 2 crew. Whatever. Yeah, good. 88 millimeter Type 99. Funny that's sort of on the, I guess like the naval or the garrison mount. I'm not sure if they came with an actual a field mount for these, or if they kind of were meant to be a sort of static weapon. It's going to give you 116 millimeters of armored penetration, so really quite potent weapon, and is going to have that flak ability as well. So yeah, reasonable. I haven't used this one personally, but looks decent. 70 millimeter Type 92. So like I was saying, a lot of those little mountain howitzers, pack artillery, things like this, perfect example. Quite accurate. It has a good heat round, so high explosive anti-tank to clarify, and it gives you 62 millimeters of penetration. Being high explosive anti-tank, it doesn't really care about range, so actually quite an effective little weapon, though it does have a short range. But given its size, you can actually be quite aggressive with it as long as you are supporting it with infantry. So I've actually had quite a lot of success with this one. 75 millimeter Type 41. Funnily enough, I have actually knocked out a KV-1 in game with this. Again, small mobile mountain howitzer type thing. It is capable of some indirect fire, though it does have a very neat incendiary round. That is something I think is quite unique to the Japanese, sort of like the phosphorus rounds that the Americans can use. It is quite useful, especially against armor. If you've tracked them, you can burn them out. So quite a good little gun. Does have a respectable anti-tank capability as well. 81 millimeter mortar. Yep, reasonable. Take it, it's fine. Again, mortars, like I've said before, my experience, I have a love-hate relationship with mortars. If it's the enemies, it always hits. If it's mine, it never hits. And you just burn through ammo. Maybe you've had a different experience. Heavy mortar, again, it's a mortar. I haven't had much luck, but it's cool. Rocket artillery. Never used this, but I have used this in Men of War, which I guess is the predecessor to this game, though I'm not sure exactly how closely related they are, and it really is quite fun. It's definitely one of Japan's more unique weapons. So essentially Japan had these 200 millimeter rockets that you could fire them from actually anything. I've seen historic photos of them essentially being fired off, wedges of wood, wood constructed launchers, just to sort of provide an angle and some guidance for the weapon. In theory, you could just fire it off the ground, though I'm not sure about the accuracy. They did provide a proper rocket tube for it, something you could actually aim, but quite a unique, interesting weapon that the Japanese did have available to them, and quite a potent one as well. 105 millimeter Type 91 gun. Again, not great for indirect fire. Does give you 62 millimeters of armor penetration, but quite potent against infantry. Though, honestly, at this point, I'd be looking for something more capable of indirect fire. And again, a shorter range, unfortunately. So do watch out for it, and you'll want to, maybe upgrade quicker. At least that's my playing style. I prefer indirect fire weapons. 105 millimeter. This one's actually quite good. The range now is getting, actually usable. It's unfortunately a lot shorter range than a lot of the Soviet weapons you're going to come up against, though that's really not saying much. 120 millimeter Type 38. Again, sort of that trend of smaller, more easy to handle artillery. This one actually quite powerful weapon. Range actually reasonable, and it is quite an effective indirect fire weapon. So do recommend taking this one. 150 millimeter gun. One of the best artillery pieces actually in the game, in my opinion. Does have quite a decent range on it. Packs quite a punch. Usually I don't go to 150 millimeters, sort of that larger artillery size, preferring to stay with a 105, but this one really quite worth it, and it does give you that range that's comparable to a lot of other nations. Definitely a good weapon. Some of the more wild, unique Japanese weapons, the Type 4 Hato. Again, not sure about pronunciation. Sorry. Haven't used it, but a 300 millimeter rocket is going to be extremely, extremely powerful. Not sure exactly how it works. If you've ever used this weapon, do let me know. Though I'd be very, very interested to see how it does. Type 94 truck. Yep, it's a truck. Motorcycle with a light machine gun. Yep, Not sure why they have 3 crew for this. That's kind of fun. Maybe you could dismount one. Don't know. Light supply, so essentially able to resupply machine guns, small arms, things like that. Honestly, just go for the full supply truck. I don't really think it's worth it to go for light supply. Type 95, little car. These were actually quite decent little cars, I understand. Has a light machine gun, though, it's going to be quite vulnerable. You could screw around with it. Fuel truck. Wow, they've got one lashed to the front, loaded in the back. Kind of fun model. I honestly, I don't think it's worth taking fuel in this game, unless you have some of the really late war, sort of heavier German vehicles that take quite a lot of fuel. Not worth it, in my opinion. Supply truck, yep, great. I use it to tow my artillery, pretty much keeps them supplied indefinitely. Worth it, and make sure you do resupply your tanks and infantry after each battle. It does save on your resource points. Engineer truck, kind of neat to resupply your mines and your engineers' sort of build points. To be honest, I don't think there's enough time in the prep phase for defense battles to really make this useful, but kind of neat. Hokey. So again, that armored personnel carrier, I guess, without the weapon. Honestly, maybe it's decent to get your infantry around and protect them from small arms fire. I don't really think it's worth it. Same thing with a machine gun. Could be good for some support. It does get you a machine gun somewhere, and you can load it with infantry. So, maybe worth it. I don't really like this type of unit. I find them quite vulnerable, and I think they do just take up points that you could definitely spend on something more useful. The Ho-Ha, so interesting, sort of a half track. They did sort of to some degree copy the German, I guess the Hanomag half tracks. This one does have a machine gun forward facing, so it does give you a decent amount of firepower, and this one is shielded. So honestly, if you are going to use armored infantry, could be worth it. Honestly, I don't really think it is. Type 87 armored car, the Vickers Crosley. So these were essentially supplied to the Japanese, I believe, as far back as the 1920s. They were used quite a lot in China, sort of in the not a war period of the conflict. That's controversial. You know, it's definitely older. The armor is quite thin, though it does have 2 Vickers machine guns. So actually quite decent against infantry. Sort of slow, but what do you expect from a essentially 1920s era armored car? It does have decent amount of firepower. I just like it. I think they're cool. I actually have used them just to screw around, get behind the enemy lines, take out artillery, things like that. They're great at infantry support, though they are quite vulnerable. Same thing with a commander, so I guess you could just dismount the officer, though it is going to take away a crew member. Type 93 armored car does have a turreted Vickers machine gun, so decent amount of firepower there, and then 3 Type 91 machine guns, so pretty good firepower, to be honest. I haven't used it, but definitely worth it. It has thin armor, really only 15 millimeters on the body, but decent infantry support and can lay out quite a decent amount of firepower. Mobile AA gun, yeah, honestly worth it. Tow your artillery, your anti-tank guns with it, and you can get stuff in quicker. Looks like a mobile rocket launcher. I haven't actually used this, but it's the Shisei 15 centimeter Torrenso. Again, apologies on the pronunciation. Not really sure on the history of this. I'd be very interested to learn more about it. Looks like a multi-rocket launcher. Essentially the Nebel Warfare, but for the Japanese. So, if that is something you want to try, one of these sort of more unique later war weapons that the Japanese developed, neat. Tractor, I guess, supply vehicle built on the Chiha medium tank. Yeah, fine. Okay, getting into the armor now. Type 94 tankette. So what you're going to notice about Japanese armor in this game, it's quite vulnerable, usually quite thinly armored until really, really late on. Generally decent mobility, pretty good, but it's very vulnerable. A lot of the main guns on them are going to be underpowered as well. Another thing you'll notice is there's often no coaxial machine gun, which is really quite a handicap. May not seem like it, but having to rely on the hull-mounted machine gun really does limit the ability of tanks and means you do have to support them with infantry. So definitely the weakest part of the Japanese faction is their armor. Though, historically that's essentially down to Japan had, reasonably limited industry at this point. A lot of the giant mega corporations that you think of now, sort of Honda, Mitsubishi, Suzu, things like that, really are kind of post-war creations in their current form. They did exist during this period, but sort of that immense manufacturing capability came after the Second World War. The Japanese basically industrial capacity was largely focused on the Navy, which really does make sense given their position in the world and the theater, being an island nation. However, that did leave limited resources for armored development, so it did unfortunately have to kind of take second priority to a lot of the Navy. As a result, it did get a little bit obsolete by the Second World War, though mechanically quite decent build quality to them, though definitely obsolete by this period. Little tankette, Honestly, good for infantry support. The machine gun is quite potent. Thin armor, like most Japanese tanks in this game, but definitely worth it early on. If not just to get a machine gun somewhere quick and not really have to worry about small arms fire. Okay, the Renault Otsu. So based on the French FT-17, the Japanese did import quite a few foreign designs earlier in their exploration of armor. So post First World War, they did use the Whippet tank briefly, and they did actually equip one with a 37mm gun. That's interesting. And the famous French FT-17. So this is their sort of locally produced version, the Otsu. So it's quite a bit quicker at 20 kilometers an hour. Reasonable armor, so 8 to 30 millimeters, so good for early in the game. It does have the 37mm Type 11 gun. Low velocity, but reasonably quick firing, and it does give you, 29 millimeters of armored penetration, so actually quite potent. Though you'll note it doesn't have a machine gun, so definitely make sure you are supporting it with infantry. The T-Key, again, sorry about the pronunciation. Good little tank, quite thin armor, so it does does have its downside, but it does give you 40 millimeters of penetration with the 37mm gun. So, reasonable early on, though no machine gun against, you're going to have to support it. The Hago, same gun, 27 millimeters of penetration, so, reasonably okay in the first few rounds, though, again, no coaxial machine gun. This is going to be a trend in Japanese tanks, and honestly it does become kind of a pain in the ass, but it does have a hull mounted machine gun, so that's definitely worth it. Another thing you'll notice with Japanese tanks is very strange machine gun positioning on the turret. This one's sort of firing off to the rear right. I can see the logic behind a lot of these machine gun placements, the ability to cover sort of the rear of the tank, if you are surrounded. But in the game, honestly, it's completely useless. I've never really been able to use them. I think once I turned the turret around and tried to use it, it's there. The Kinu, so similar vehicle. It does have, I believe, the turret off the Chiha with the 57mm Type 97 gun. Terrible armor penetration on this, 19 millimeters at 100 meters, quite light armor, so essentially it's the upgunned Hago. Does maintain the hull mounted machine gun, and you do have a rear facing machine gun. Again, useless, but good against infantry. And reasonably quick. The Shiki, so again, pronunciation, 37mm gun, so not great, especially once you reach this point. In the hull though, so not a great anti-tank weapon, not great armor, rear-facing machine gun. So honestly, I do not recommend this, unless you really don't have another option. But to be honest, use just use the Hago. It actually gives you a more versatile vehicle, slightly less armor, but honestly that's fine. The Type 89, 37mm gun, so it's okay. It does give you a front hull mounted machine gun, which is cool. Light armor though, reasonably okay speed. Yeah, it's fine early on. The Type 89 Ego, again, pronunciation, 57mm gun, so terrible against armor, though actually pretty good against infantry. Does give you those two machine guns again. So, fine, light armor. Type 97 Chiha, so, one of the most recognizable Japanese tanks of the Second World War. It does have that 57mm gun. You do get a hull mounted machine gun, so quite a decent tank, but you are going to want to maybe not rely on it if you're going to be dealing with a lot of armor, which you will, but not a bad tank. the Type 97 Kai Chiha, so essentially the upgraded version of the previous tank. Long 47mm high velocity gun, so it does give you 67mm of penetration, so you will be able to deal with some of the early mid game Soviet tanks. It's gonna get a little bit obsolete once you come up against T-34s, though you can get a good flanking shot, reasonably maneuverable, still quite light armor though, and again, no coaxial machine gun. You will notice that's an issue. The Chi-He, so 47mm gun again, functionally the same tank. The Ho-E, so essentially the Chiha, but now it's actually equipped with a 75mm essentially howitzer. Not really better anti-tank capability, though you are firing a heat round now, which is nice, so you don't have to worry about the range quite as much. Otherwise, essentially the same tank, but it will give you a better high explosive round. The Ho-E Type 2. Little bit better armor, actually, so that is quite nice. Again, that light armor will leave you quite vulnerable, so be expecting casualties in your tank crews, but definitely an armor upgrade is nice. Chiha with the 120, it almost looks comical with that muzzle brake. Anyway, you're going to have a decent heat round, though quite a potent high explosive round. So good at assaulting positions, okay against tanks, but really going to be quite deadly against soft skins and infantry. So, reasonable if you want more of an assault gun type weapon. The Ho-E Ku Type 2, not sure on the pronunciation, essentially, a very similar vehicle. You have okay armor now, reasonable mobility, and now you get the 57mm gun with 98mm penetration, so that's actually quite decent now. You're really going to want to have a gun at least like that when you're dealing with the T-34s, dealing with certainly anything heavier. The Japanese do, especially later on in the game, once you've spent those research points, have some actually reasonable anti-tank weapons. In my opinion, this is kind of where it starts. Though you'll never really get that thick armor, so you definitely have to be careful with them, though they do have pretty okay guns. The Chinu Type 3. So these tanks were actually produced in a reasonable number. They never saw service in the Second World War. They were essentially retained in Japan, anticipating the eventual Allied invasion. So, fortunately they never really came into use. Though, they are a reasonable tank, actually. Okay armor now. Up to 50mm, so, you're getting comparable to a lot of the medium tanks, though still on the light side, and you do have that pretty potent 75mm Type 3 gun. The Chinu Kai, so now you have same tank, but now it's equipped with a even better anti-tank gun, so 133mm, easily takes out T-34s, even KVs actually. Really quite a good anti-tank weapon on this, though unfortunately no coaxial machine gun. Armor is still, but honestly this is actually quite a good tank. The only issue again is that lack of anti-infantry capability, but otherwise it's quite a good weapon. It's almost like the Sherman Firefly, but just with the machine gun in the hull rather than the turret. Not as good, but definitely my favorite Japanese tank in this game. It's definitely the one I've had, the most luck playing with. Going back in time, sort of down the multi-turreted, a little more experimental route in Japanese armor. So we have the Type 91 tank. Japan did experiment with a decent amount of heavy tank concepts. Not many of them really saw action or were really adopted. Though you do have, a reasonable 57mm gun, gives you 55mm penetration, I assume with a heat round, and you do have this sort of interesting little auxiliary turret. So that's that's reasonable. Kind of makes up for the lack of coaxial if you are able to traverse that. And once again, the strange rear-mounted machine gun. Somewhat light armor, but yeah, fine. The Type 95 Rogo. Kind of weird. You have a rear-mounted machine gun, a rear-mounted machine gun turret. I don't know what they're expecting, like to be surrounded or something. I think it's probably essentially designed as a breakthrough tank, right? So thinking a little bit more, static defensive positions, you're breaking through sort of First World War style. Weird positioning on the weapons, though you do have a 70 millimeter, essentially howitzer there. Crap armor penetration, but it will be pretty potent against infantry and soft skins. And then you're going to have the 37mm Type 94 anti-tank gun, giving you your sort of armor penetration in a little auxiliary turret. All I can say about this tank is what the fuck. I haven't used it, but I kind of want to now. The Chiri. So this is the sort of the final evolution in the Japanese tech tree in this game, and it's interesting. So 20 to 75 millimeters of hull armor, 20 to 100 millimeters of turret armor. You're sort of in Sherman territory, so, respectable, but certainly not what you'd expect from a vehicle this large or sort of heavy. You have the weirdly positioned hull-mounted 37 millimeter Type 100 anti-tank gun. So, 40 millimeters. It's okay, I guess, against light tanks, but not sure why you'd really use it when you have the 75 millimeter Type 2 anti-tank gun, which can penetrate 133 millimeters. So you're not really going to use it. It's really just kind of good for that coaxial machine gun that somehow they figured out here. And then probably the strangest positioned machine gun out the left side of the turret. Yep, we'll move on. You do have a pintle mounted machine gun. Great way to get your commander killed. Type 1 Honi, so a reasonable tank destroyer. You do get the 92 millimeters of penetration, so reasonable anti-tank gun. Light armor, but it's a tank destroyer, it's an ambush weapon, so yep, decent. The Type 1 Honi 2, 105 millimeter self-propelled gun, so yeah, decent if you want a self-propelled gun. The Japanese really don't have a lot of these, so if you are into a more mechanized force, yeah, reasonable. Type 97 Chiha with the long gun, incredibly exposed crew, though it does give you quite a potent weapon. Good for, I guess, assault gun, mobile artillery, that sort of thing, but you're going to be quite vulnerable. So a good way to sort of mechanize your artillery. And finally, the Type 4 Horo, so a much heavier 150 millimeter Type 38 gun, mechanized. So reasonable, light armor, good way to move a gun around essentially. And you could use it kind of like an assault gun, but you really can't take a hit. Anyway, so that concludes our review of the Japanese units in Gates of Hell Ostfront, available through the Valor mod. Let me know if you've played the Japanese faction or any faction in the Valor mod, and let me know if there's a faction you'd like me to review next. Thank you again for watching. Do like and subscribe, really does help out the channel, and I appreciate it, and I'll see you next time. Thank you again. Bye.